If you've been watching these Tuesday Reads videos in order, you know that I've been going on a whole journey with the microphone and the audio generally, that I can't record without it now because there is some weird ringing that I had to try my best to mute, to not great success for a little book haul section. Fortunately, it wasn't a whole video. But yeah, I finally feel like I've resolved the mic issue, and hopefully that will be reflected on this video as well. But in any case, all of this won't matter very soon, because when I get back to Santiago, which is next week, I'm actually going to have a proper mic and a different setup. Hello everybody, I'm Oliver and this is Chaotic Bibliophile. And yes, this is my last video in the UK for a bit. I'm going back next week and I feel all sorts of way about it. On the one hand, it's great to be able to see my parents and my friends from there and the rest of my family. And I do have lots of projects and loads of things to get done there. However, it also is very gutting because I want to be able to return in a long time, and that is always very strange. And not just because of money, but because I will be starting my visa application process, which is great. I'm really excited about that. It is one of the pros that once I'm back in Santiago, I can begin that process because it needs to be done from outside the UK. But once it's started, you can't visit. That is very terrifying. Obviously, if I could, I wouldn't be just going back and forth because it's expensive and I don't have the means to do it. And I have work and loads of other stuff to get done. However, it's still very gutting emotionally knowing that if there was an emergency or there was something that really required my presence here, I really can't come. And that feels really weird. So hopefully the visa will come through quickly and hopefully nothing that requires my presence will happen. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. But I am excited to get some stuff off the ground while I'm there. Speaking of which, next week, I won't have a video for you. However, I do have loads of extra videos planned. So I don't know if I'll manage this every single week, but I'll make up for it if that would be the case. But I do plan to do Tuesday reads and extra videos, such as my top books of 2025, which I haven't even planned yet. I know, obviously, because I remember reading them, some of the videos I want to include, but I haven't started crafting the list. So that will be very exciting. I also want to go through my stats, show you my spreadsheet. I also want to show you the books that I'm carrying from the UK, which are way too many. But I think it will be an exciting video because you'd think it's mostly books that I've shown in my book hauls, but actually that's not the case because a lot of those I have actually already read and therefore are staying here. These are some books that I've acquired here and there or been gifted recently and I haven't shown in a video, and or also books that I left here in June. Yes, I have a problem. Actually, one of the videos is about a book buying ban that I'm in, that I'm really excited to talk about because, I don't know, I have thoughts, I have feelings, I have reading projects and plans, so I will tell you more about that in a separate video. So yeah, lots of interesting, in my opinion, stuff coming in. Hopefully you're looking forward to that. And I also want to say that I hope, because things have been very hectic and I've been going back and forth a lot, and I don't think I'll have too much time to edit. I hope I can keep the chaotic yap to a minimum, although already going awry, because I hope I don't have to edit as much, which, to be fair, is the point of these Tuesday videos, but the last few, because I've been so all over the place and so exhausted, I feel like have needed a bit more TLC than I was expecting for a Tuesday Reads video, so hopefully this won't be like that. And I will be a bit more lenient as well with the little ums and the little connectors, and if I make a little mistake, I might just plow along. I don't know if it makes that big of a difference for you watching, but it definitely feels like it for me. So yeah, we'll see. And I think that's all I had to say. Oh, other than also, in spite of all the hecticness, thankfully I've had a lot of time to read because I've had a lot of train time, lots of walking audiobook time. So I'm really excited to tell you about these books. First, I am halfway through The World of Yesterday by Stefan Zweig, translated from the German by Anthea Bell. And I am loving this. I just had to pause it because there were a couple of books that I really needed to finish, either for buddy reads or to get back to the libraries or for other projects. So I just took a little pause from this, but I am back on it and I hope to finish it this weekend. Another book I am almost finished with is Roots and Currents, Articles and Essays, 1991 to 2014 by Ajahn Amaro. This is what it says on the tin, but it's by a Buddhist monk in the forest Thai tradition, and I picked this up at a Buddhist center that we visited a few months ago now. I picked up a number of books because I'm just really interested. I'm really interested in religious thought and philosophy generally, all sorts of strands, but I am particularly interested in the practice of Buddhism and as it relates to meditation and living, mindfully. And these essays are really good. They're both very informative. They're very historical and sort of contextualizing this particular tradition as opposed to other traditions, for example, the Zen tradition, and even within Thailand, for example, the northern tradition versus the southern tradition. It's just really interesting all around. Yeah, if you're interested, I recommend it. I'm sure you can pick this up. This is Amaravati Publications, which is, I think, the name of the Buddhist center that we visited. And then the final book I need to finish before I leave is I Could Read the Sky by Timothy O'Grady and Steve Pike. And this is a really interesting book because it has really beautiful artistic photographs, black and white photographs that sort of go with the text. And I'm not sure which one came first or how collaboratively these two artists work to create this. Let's call it a novel. It is a work of fiction, but it is highly inspired by interviews of Irish immigrants, and the photographs are depicting Irish landscapes and I assume also Irish migrants all over, but they are really stark and tender, some of them. Some others feel like really cold and stark, and yeah, it's just really beautiful writing. It's about this man who is in London, and he, I think, is an older man, and he's sort of remembering life. And the tense use is really interesting because it shifts in ways that, if you're not paying a lot of attention, can make it a bit confusing, because it echoes how memory works, especially when you've had such a hard life and you're so far away from home. So obviously it's very resonant of a certain kind of migrant experience that's very rough and also very community based, and it talks a lot about your roots and Irishness and how that feels at the end of a life that's mostly spent elsewhere. So I'm really, really enjoying this. It's really beautiful. The one book that I'm not currently reading per se, but it's going to be my airport book, is, you might have guessed it if you've been following along, The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny. Basically, I'm really, really enjoying this. I'm about 150 pages in, but I realized I wasn't going to finish it in time, or if I did, I would have to stop the other projects and then take all the other projects books, and it was just not feasible. So I decided, because I already know I like it that much, it can just be my airport book, and hopefully it'll remain as good. I mean, you know me, I will have a backup book, but hopefully this can accompany me in my very long journey. It's not even a direct flight, so yeah, loads of reading time. With that, we'll move on to my read books. There's two books I unfortunately can't tell you about because they are for the BookTube prize, but I do want to tell you what they are so you know what group I'll be judging. I've signed up for nonfiction this year, and I mean, now you can alternate, but for the first round, I did nonfiction, and I am so glad I did, because the group, just from one look, just at one glance at that list, and most of the books were so up my alley. It actually promises to be a really hard to judge round. I've already finished two of the books. One is Daughters of the Bamboo Grove by Barbara Demick, and the other one, I've been listening to it. It's called Jane Austen's Bookshelf, or Jane Austen's Shelf, by Rebecca Romney. So you will get a full video about that. But I'm really excited to tell you about it. I have so many thoughts on these books, and I'm sure I will as well on the books that are upcoming. I need to have finished all of them by the end of March, and I think the first few the first few days of April, the announcement will be released. So after that, I will have my reviews and ranking up. Let's move on to the DNF, which is not as dramatic as The Hour of the Star last week. That was very shocking to me. But this is a bit of a shame as well for me because I had just added this to my want to read list on the Storygraph, and then I saw it at the library and I picked it up, and that is Apricot, Jam and Other Stories by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. And he's a winner of the Nobel Prize of Literature, but I did not like these short stories. Actually, well, look, it started really well. I really started liking the writing, but then it felt like it fizzled out. And I have heard some criticism that some of his work is very uneven, that some of his work, especially the more autobiographical one, is stronger. This is my first Solzhenitsyn. It might be the case that I do get along more with his other works, and I do want to check them out. These stories are all about Russia after the Cold War. I honestly don't have that much to say because I didn't get that far along this. I just wasn't enjoying it loads, and I wasn't finding loads in the prose itself to grab onto. Of course, the stories themselves were interesting, but to me, the writing and the artfulness of a work of fiction, especially a work of fiction, is just so important that I just felt a bit meh about the whole thing. And when you have so many books and you are kind of on the clock, I don't know. Let me know if I should give it another chance. I might in the future. But I'll definitely move first to his more famous work, just because if I don't like that, then that's more of a not the writer for me problem. I'm just looking forward to your thoughts if you've read this or if you've read other work by the author. Please let me know. Okay, and now after yapping about it week after week, I can finally tell you about A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. And this is going on my list of books read as contemporary classics. I think it's a book that consistently appears on lists, that it's being discussed, it's being the source of academic work, not just this one, but all of Ruth Ozeki's work, although this one is definitely the most famous one. And this is a dual narrative. It starts with a journal by this girl, Naoko. She is a student in Japan, but she is writing in English because she grew up in America until she was a tween, and then her father lost her job and they ended up having to move to Japan. She just couldn't adapt there. She was too American. She felt like an outsider, and she started getting seriously bullied. And she's writing all of this under the guise of writing her grandma, old Yuko. Why don't I remember the name of the grandma? Jiko. It's a mix of what I thought. Old Jiko, who is a Buddhist monk. Naoko is supposedly writing her story, but actually she starts just talking about herself and using it as a diary, and she's communicating with the reader directly, even though she doesn't know who that reader is. It's a fairly common thing to do in a diary. There's that story, and then there's the reader of this journal, which is Ruth, and she's an author. She's trying to complete her next work, but I think she's trying for the first time to do a memoir, and she's failing. She lives in an island in Canada with her long-term partner. I don't know if they're married. I don't know if that is mentioned, but yes, Oliver. She's really struggling as well because she moved to be with him, and she brought her mom, who has now passed away after being ill for a long time. So there are all these little details of life that come into play at the time these two narratives intersect by Ruth reading Naoko's journal. I really love this. I don't think it's a perfect novel. I think it's on the risk of becoming too overtly sentimental and too cliche and too convenient, but it eschews that by, first of all, being interesting from the start. I think the writing is superb. I think the voices of the characters are quite distinct, and I like that. I found it all very believable and compelling and pulling me forward. I always love an epistolary format. I always love documents. There are emails, there are letters, there's a whole thing. And then I just respect Ruth Ozeki so much for just being weird and accepting that her writing is weird and letting it go weird and it doesn't really maybe make sense that much by the end. It's a bit magical realism, but you didn't expect it at first, or maybe I didn't expect it at first, but I loved it. I really, really loved it. It just feels like it encompasses a lot. It feels very ambitious, and I really respect it. And I was really invested on all the stories. That was Tale from the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. Oh, I actually had one more note that, oh, I'm so angry I didn't remember to say before. Is Ruth Ozeki a bit of an edgier Richard Powers? If you've read the Overstory or Bewilderment, and I haven't read his older work, but I definitely want to. I feel like there's a lot of that sort of ambitiousness that, did I say ambitious? Ambition that doesn't always pan out necessarily, but it still carries you through. And there's a daring spirit to really solid writing. And yeah, I feel like there's something along those lines. Moving on, I want to tell you about Straight Acting by Will Tosh. This is the only audiobook that I finished recently. This was great, but not as great as expected. I had a physical copy of this, but then I got it as a suggested, especially because I found out he read it himself, and he has a really pleasing voice and a really nice accent. How can I describe this? This is obviously queer Shakespeare studies, which is a big thing in Shakespearean studies nowadays, but it hasn't really been broached for the public as much, for the general reader, and that's what Will Tosh is trying to do. He's trying to both prove that Shakespeare's works are inherently queer, which they are. There's a lot of queerness that's deliberate, that's purposeful, that's settled in a context. Sorry, I was trying to fix my hair, but I think it's just that sort of fuses with my hair and that makes me think is messier than it is. Anyways, moving on to Straight Acting. Yeah, so there's a lot of textual analysis in this book, but he's also trying to contextualize Shakespeare in his queer environment. And I feel like there is a tension between these two sides of the book. It's a very short book, and yet at some points it did feel a bit like a slog. Maybe because I'm on board with Shakespeare being a queer author and him writing queer characters, and I know he did that and I've studied that. I was not as interested in the critical text. Also, I do like Shakespeare, but I don't want to say not that much. It's not that not that much. It's just that I don't know, compared to when he was talking about playwrights I never heard of, or even Marlowe, who obviously I have heard about, but I didn't know personally, but I didn't know that much about. It was just so much more interesting. So sometimes it felt like it was bogged down by the close reading analysis, which I don't know if I would have felt if the book was only close reading. You know what I mean? I think it's still a very good book, and especially for a general reader, or, well, a general reader who has more than a passing interest in Shakespeare. I think if someone is reading it just for the queer context of Elizabethan age, ooh, they might find it too Shakespeare, too like text focused. I don't know. That's why I mean there's like certain tension, which is this makes it really for a certain specific reader. But fortunately, I am that reader, so I did really love it, and I did find it really interesting, especially, again, when it referred to all the other artists at Shakespeare Town that produced work that was widely read, sometimes banned, and how those works both thematically and contextually influenced Shakespeare's work and sort of shaped the cultural attitudes at the time towards queerness and queer love and cross-dressing and all of this. I just thought it was really, really interesting. Will Tosh's writing is very personable, and as I said, his reading is also very personable. I really enjoyed him as a reader of an audiobook, so much so that I even forgave the bits of creative fiction that he put at the beginning. He created these little scenes to sort of set the tone of each of the chapters, and they were basically fan fiction. And you know what? I was against it when I first heard that that would happen, but by the end, I was sold. In the audiobook, they also put a little bit of music to them, which felt really fun and immersive, and also made it really clear that this was not made up per se, but imagined, I think is a better word for it. I really enjoyed it. I don't think, again, it's a perfect book, but it was really good. And if you're interested in Shakespeare or queer readings of that period, just give it a read. Very different feelings on this also queer book, The Safekeep. This was such a big disappointment, but also I think this is a romance book. It's this that is what this is, which is fine. And if I evaluate it as what I expect from a romance book, this is perfect. You know, it has a relationship. There is the trope of enemies to lovers, hate to love. They have some sexy times, and it ends with a romance ending, let's say. And if I just explore it under that lens with serviceable writing that at times is quite insightful and especially does a good job in characterizing the main character, Isabel, then yeah, okay, it's a decent book, 3 stars, whatever. But as a literary novel that also won a literary prize, I am just flabbergasted that I've heard so many great things about this book. So this is about Isabel, who is by far the most interesting element of the novel. Well, one of the two interesting elements of the novel. She lives in this house that was her mother's, and she is overly zealous about this house because she was the only carer for her mother, and she knows, even though she hasn't really become aware of it in a very conscious way, but she knows she's queer and she doesn't really like men. So she's sort of created this safe haven for herself. But the house isn't even hers, it's technically her brother's house for when he chooses to marry. But thankfully for her, he seems to not be very interested in that. And he likes women, but he's not interested in forming a family or settling down. But obviously, that still means it's very precarious for her. The novel starts with a really cool scene where Louis just has brought this woman, Eva, into the family to introduce her to Isabel and their other brother Hendrik, who is gay and has a long-term partner, who is the other interesting element because he is clearly dark-skinned. He's from Algiers, and there are small, very subtle but hard-hitting instances of discrimination that I honestly would have loved to hear his story instead. Or also Isabel does have an interesting story. It's just that, so basically Eva, through some really convoluted situation, she needs to stay at Isabel's house, and she starts staying at the mother's room, and it happens whatever you imagine from a novel, a romance novel. That sounds like I'm really down on romance novels. I'm fine with them, but I personally don't read them. I used to read tons of fan fiction, so I feel like whatever people get out of romance novels is what I got out of fan fiction. But it's not what I come for again. In an award-winning book, a lot of it was very predictable. And then there's a plot twist that I won't discuss in case you want to read this, but I also think it comes out of nowhere, and it has this commercial fiction bent to, oh, this is a big reveal and this changes everything, and now the book is about this very important topic that is not to be taken lightly. And I just kept thinking, well, now from a book about this recluse neurotic woman who is so fascinating, then it became a very half-baked romance where everything happens really quickly. You don't really know how the feelings change. It is not very believable. But again, in a romance book, I'm like, fine. Like, I thought it was okay. I buddy read this with Ishani, and she did mention she didn't like the sex scenes or anything like that because she didn't believe the romance. I agree. I mean, I thought the sex scenes were okay. I don't mind that they didn't have this very strong connection, but then afterwards they were so in love. I just thought, why? Okay, this is a topic that I think merits some consideration generally when we talk about historical fiction, because I forgot to say this is set in the Netherlands in the 1960s. We always depict these old-timey historical romances as people who didn't communicate loads. And I understand, especially in terms of starting relationships, there was a lot of secrecy involved. There's a lot of yearning and staring, and I'm sure that heightened emotions. But if you read correspondence by queer people, there was so much simmering, there was so much communication. These people were having conversations and were building strong relationships, but very much the same way that we do now. One would argue even more so because there was more time for it. There was less expendability in these things. So I just don't buy it. Again, it's fine. It's fine. It's not the worst book that I read this year or ever. It's an okay book. If you like light novels that deal with sort of a little bit more serious topics and you want to read a queer romance, fine, go for it. But it was just really disappointing, and the only reason I finished it was because of book club. However, the next two books I need to tell you about are amazing books, so I'm actually really excited. This is Saint Sebastian's Abyss by Mark Haber. I got this book recently at the Broadway bookshop, which is in Broadway Books, and I really, really love this bookshop, not only because it has an amazing selection, it's one of those small but mighty bookshops, but also because they have so many US editions and also US only books that are published by small presses, and I'm sure you can get them online, but obviously that's another step, and it's just nice to be able to go to a bookshop and see stuff by Coffee Press House, for example. Coffee House Press, for example. Okay, I really need to start wrapping this up because clearly I've been yapping for way too long. And I described this in my Storygraph review as, if you love Thomas Bernhard and David Foster Wallace, but also love making fun of them, this is for you. This is a satirical novel about two friends. It's narrated from the perspective of one of the friends. They were at Oxford together studying art, history, and criticism, and they both discovered this painting called Saint Sebastian's Abyss and become obsessed with it and become the leading experts in this painting and its painter, Count Brockenbauer, is it? Count Hugo Beckenbauer, who is supposed to be a Dutch Renaissance painter. And it's, first of all, it's hilarious. It's really neurotic. It has that same Thomas Bernhard prose that repeats and repeats in itself, and it's like a spiral, a descent into exasperation and madness, set utterly complimentary in this case. Thomas Bernhard has tried my patience a few times, but this one I just flew by. It's so engrossing, so compelling in so many ways, but it's also so tender. It's clearly a satire that comes from love. Sorry. In order to understand what it's addressing, you should also know that these two critics that became authorities also had a falling out, and now the main character has received an email, a relatively short email, that the friend is dying in Berlin, and so he's traveling to see him on his deathbed. We get the outline of this very homoerotically charged friendship. It's so interesting. It's so good. It's a meditation on how obtuse critics can be, how dismissive. It's sort of exposing the worst of literary criticism, while at the same time having this tenderness for passion and appreciating art and appreciating obsessiveness over art as a motive for life, which, as an art lover, and especially having been exposed to so much great art, this trip specifically, I just felt so deeply. It's like, yes, these two men are ridiculous, but also engaging with such passion in art is a worthwhile endeavor. Just maybe don't be such a dick about it. I feel like that is the overall message. So it's very funny. I laughed out loud. It's a little bit sinister, a little bit depressing. It just hit that spot that you would find reading one of the most superb David Foster Wallace essays. I know I've already been yapping for so long, but I really want to read you this little bit. I read and reread Schmidt's relatively short email, going as far as printing it so I could underline specific passages during the long flight to Berlin. I printed 3 copies, in fact. 2 for the flight and 1 to tuck in my luggage in the event of some mild misfortune. And it goes on from there. But if that type of neurotic behavior isn't something you want to read about, then I just think we have different reading tastes. Not quite as funny and as accomplished, but still also very good. I read Zippermouth by Laurie Weeks, and this was originally published in 2011. It won the Lambda in 2012, and it's only recently been published in the UK by Cypher Press, who have all of my love. And the way I can best describe this is Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs, but much, much less obnoxious. This is about this lesbian junkie who is not even trying her best, I would say. She's surviving, crawling through New York in the 90s, I think. She writes deranged letters to dead artists such as Vivian Lee and Sylvia Plath. Oh, not me, just trancing Sylvia Plath. It's a deranged monologue that disintegrates into addiction. She tries to claw back from it a couple times. She's also in love with a woman she's not sure is straight or queer or what's going on there. She is a bad influence on her. They are a bad influence on each other. They egg each other on. They drink together. It's quite messy, but it's very funny. It's one of those, like San Sebastian's Abyss, satirical and a bit mean, but from a place of having been there, from love, from tenderness. And I think that balance is really well achieved. It is a bit of a plotless book, but that's not a problem for me. It's sort of just a point in time, a snapshot. It is really short, and like with Saint Sebastian's Abyss, I don't think either of these books could withstand being 300 pages, and that's okay because they are not. The writing was precise and expressed what needed to be expressed, and then finished. I really, really enjoyed this. I wish it had had more letters. That was my favorite part. I wish this had gotten a bit more frenetic in that direction. But overall, really good. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you've been reading, or if you've read any of these books, if you'd like to read them after hearing me talk about them. I will be looking forward to sharing more videos with you coming up and sharing my new setup, whatever that might be. See you next time.